Institute of Human Resource Management, and welcome to this webinar brought to you by IHRM in partnership by the Chiromo Hospital Group, a very dear partner to us, and you will be hearing a lot more from them in this session and even in days to come. We were buying a little more time for the participants to join, and we have hit the 300 mark, so I believe we have a good number to get started. With me in the panel from the Chiromo group, we have Grace Kashanja, we have Dr. Frank Jenga, our speaker this morning, and we have Beryl Karan, who works for the Chiromo Hospital group. We have apologies from our executive director, Madam Kuresha Abdullahi. She was appointed as a panel member in the recruitment of the chairperson of the Public Service Commission. And so she's at Harambee House for that meeting. She sends her regards, and hopefully she will join us in the course of this webinar. We're also expecting some of our council members. The moment they join us, we will give them an opportunity to speak. If we will have started our session, then we will do so at the end of that session. So at this point, because it's 10:43, allow me to just give us a very quick introduction of our speaker this morning. He is
Irene, are you there?
Hello, kindly confirm that you can hear me, please. Burial.
Yes, Irene, we can hear you now.
All right. Apologies for that. I think my internet is dropping. So at this point, we have introduced Dr. Jenga, and the floor is yours now, Burial and Daktari, to proceed with this webinar. Thank you, and welcome to all the participants.
Grace, please proceed.
Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think technology is having the better of us this morning, but such is life, and I think we must now continue to the best of our ability. Irene, I just need your confirmation that you can actually see and hear me so that I can proceed, or anybody else who can hear me. Beryl, Grace?
Yes, Daktari,
I
can hear you.
I am loud and clear, which is very, very, very good news on a day like this. We now have 390 men and women in participation, which I think is an excellent number of people to be attending a meeting of this nature at a time such as this one. We have time this morning to consider all the issues that are in hand, and I would propose that we approach this morning in the following manner. The first thing is I intend to tell you a little bit of who I am, in a sense that so that anything that I say that you agree with or disagree with, you will have context in disagreeing or in agreeing with me. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got to be here where I am. The second thing that I propose to do, which I think is also important, is to what I will call set context. By set context, I mean we have 401 people participating in this webinar. This is a very large number of people to be attending any event in mental health. And I would like to set the context as to how we as Kenyans got to a place where mental health, our mental health, the mental health of the population of Kenya is important. And the third thing I will do is I will then do what you all expect me to do, which is to talk a little bit about mental health and the workplace and the challenges that arise during and after this COVID situation. So a lot of times I have been asked by people such as yourselves, who is a psychiatrist? What is a psychiatrist? How does a psychiatrist differ from a psychologist? If I want to be a psychiatrist, how do I become one like that? And so on and so forth. And the reason for that question usually is because, in a manner of speaking, our field of psychiatry and mental health in general are relatively new subject in our part of the world. And just so that the doubt is removed, a psychiatrist is a medically qualified individual, meaning that in my case, I attended the University of Nairobi, where I studied for a general degree in medicine and surgery, graduated in '75, and then proceeded a year later to the United Kingdom, where I obtained the higher qualification and became a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So the question that is then asked is if you only deal with the mind, why is it necessary to go along that very complicated and somewhat circuitous route to become a doctor first and then to become a psychiatrist? The easiest way to understand this is to appreciate the fact that all mental conditions, and there are at least about 300 of them, occur and exist in the body of a human being. And for one to understand that which goes wrong, it is necessary and appropriate for the doctor to understand how things work when things are going right. That's the first way of looking at it. The second way of looking at it is slightly different, which is to think that when something goes wrong with the body, then the mind cannot function normally. And the converse is also true. When something goes wrong with the mind, the body is also in a way impaired. And we, as psychiatrists, are doctors who have been trained to understand how that interface between the body and the mind act and work, sometimes together, sometimes against each other. And I will be demonstrating when we come to the second part, no, the third part of this presentation, how diseases of the body sometimes lead to the diseases of the mind and vice versa. Let me give a quick example just to make this one point. There are some diseases, for example, of this gland here, the thyroid gland, that make you appear exceedingly anxious. In a condition we call thyrotoxicosis, or excessive activity of the thyroid gland, the presentation to the doctor will usually be with a rapidly beating heart, excessive fear and anxiety. And at the workplace, for example, the employer might get upset that the person with thyrotoxicosis is becoming too anxious for no reason. So that's an example of the disease of the thyroid appearing like a mental condition. The converse is also true in a sense, because when the thyroid gland is malfunctioning or not functioning properly, and it is underperforming, the person will go to work looking and appearing very sad and very unhappy and very slow, and their productivity will be very little. To all intents and purposes, a person with a thyroid gland that is not functioning normally will appear as though they are clinically depressed. So you can see that a disease that really belongs to the physician can manifest itself with what appear to be psychological consequences. Let me illustrate that point again, starting now with diseases of the mind and how they affect the body. For example, we've all heard and know a lot about the condition schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is one of the most severe and chronic diseases of the mind. And the way schizophrenia affects the body is actually in many different ways. The most obvious one is the fact that people who suffer from schizophrenia on the average live 20 years less than people who do not have schizophrenia. Let me put it differently. If the life expectancy in Kenya is, say, 70 years, people without schizophrenia will live for 70 years on the average. On the other hand, people who have schizophrenia will, on the average, live only for 50 years, meaning that what appears to be a harmless mental condition actually has very serious consequences in shortening life. And this is not, repeat, this is not only because people with schizophrenia die by suicide, which they do. The reality is that there are many other conditions that people with schizophrenia get, including diseases of the digestive system, diseases of the chest, of the heart, that make them lose their lives earlier than they should. So the first point that I wanted to make as to why a psychiatrist has to be a doctor is so that you can understand the interrelationship between mental conditions and physical conditions. At the end of this presentation, I hope there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and I will be happy to answer any questions in this area. So that's the first thing that I really wanted to say by way of introducing myself. The second thing that I wanted to say is to give context as to why we are here today. Over the weekend, those who are that way inclined will have noticed a very active series of events on social media and on mainstream media reporting and regarding the 10th of October, which was the World Mental Health Day. The World Health Organization declared some years ago that this particular day will see the whole world actually commemorate mental health issues. And again, I don't know how old the members of this webinar are. In the years gone by, when I graduated as a psychiatrist more than 40 years ago, even the word psychiatry was effectively unknown. And certainly the word mental only referred to Mathari Mental Hospital, which was synonymous with chronic, incurable diseases that were really relegated completely to the periphery of society. And anything regarding mental health was generally discussed in whispers at the very most, was discussed often with shame and extreme stigma and stigmatization, and really was a province mostly of witch doctors and other occult organizations. In the last 15 or 20 years, that scenario has been changing globally. And a number of events have taken place on the global scale, which really have had a very interesting impact, which has not spared our territory. For example, a number of celebrities have come out and declared the fact that they have been afflicted by this or other mental condition. More recently, the grandchildren of our very own Her Majesty the Queen have come out to talk about how the death of their mother, Princess Diana, has affected and afflicted them up to this age, and so on. Lots of musicians, lots of young men and women are almost proud now at the international scene to discuss and describe the mental conditions that they have come across. On the 1st of June 2019, while addressing the nation in Narok, the president of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, made what for me was a landmark statement, which essentially said that this is the red line that we as Kenyans are drawing. And from today, moving forward, nobody will be allowed to ignore the mental health of the Kenyan people. And in a very clear speech, he directed his own government to do all that it could to understand what the problem in Kenya was, and more importantly, what was to be done about it. And he directed his cabinet to look into this matter, particularly matters relating to violence at home, depression, suicide, and all those issues that we all know about. This position he subsequently repeated in Parliament, if only to underscore the seriousness of it. The consequence of that directive in 2019 was the requirement, the consequence rather was that Cabinet made the decision to form a task force to examine the causes of the challenges that are before our country. And I was asked to chair that task force, which met and did its work. Some people say in record time, but the work was done. On the 7th of July, 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we launched this report and presented it to the government. And this report, which is available online, really is a summary of what we found. And what we found in Kenya is what one might call a deplorable state of affairs. We found that there was a very, very, very heavy burden of mental disorders in our entire country, number one. Number two, we found that there was a great deal of stigma and stigmatization about and around mental disorders in our country. And thirdly, and most worryingly, we found that we as a country are very poorly invested in the field of mental health. So in a manner of speaking, what we established was that we had a double whammy, as they call it. Number one, a very heavy burden of disease, and on the other side, very low investment indeed. And that really was the problem. So we made 15 recommendations. I would just give you one or two of them. One is that we recommended that our country set up a mental wellness and happiness commission to monitor the state of mental health and happiness amongst the Kenyan people. Now, this is not wishful thinking, by the way. The Kingdom of Bhutan measures not just the GDP of our citizens, but also measures the gross national happiness of our people. The argument there being that happiness is as important as money in your pocket. The second recommendation that is under consideration is a declaration that mental illness is a national emergency of epidemic proportions. This recommendation was grounded on the findings that we have already stated, which is that we have a big problem, as I will be demonstrating on the third part of my presentation, with very low investment. And I'm happy to report that in response to this recommendation, the government is already making an investment case to try and understand what investing in mental health will give as a return to our country. Another recommendation that we made, and you'll see why this is context of why we are here today, is the creation of Mathari Teaching and Referral Hospital as a semi-autonomous institution. I am very happy to report that that has already happened. Another recommendation was to gazette the second week of October as the National Mental Health Awareness Week. That's what we're doing today. We are doing exactly this. So goes on and on. All the recommendations that we made are receiving careful attention by our government. Now, to oversee the implementation of this report, I was asked to occupy the newly founded office of Presidential Advisor on Mental Health, in which context, ladies and gentlemen, I now find myself here today. I thought that background would be helpful, if not interesting, so that we can all understand, all 494 of us here present can understand that where we are today in mental health, discussing this terribly important subject is not something that was thought about by your Institute of Human Resources Management last week. It is a product of carefully and systematically developed and evolved programs that are not just local, but international in nature and origin. As I conclude this second part of my presentation, and in preparation for the third part, which I suppose is what all of you were expecting me to start off with, let me say that the declaration of COVID-19 as a pandemic more than 18 months ago now came with a huge number of challenges, which I think we may have to look at today. The World Health Organization in May of last year, actually almost just a month into the pandemic, issued another report that is worth looking at, which was very clear and explicit about what to expect. The World Health Organization warned us as follows, that there is going to be a very steady increase in the number of cases of COVID-19 over the coming months at that time. But more importantly and relevant to what we are doing this morning, that following that very steady increase in infections, another problem would follow behind very steadily. And that problem was that of mental disorders. So we were warned a month, 2 months after the onset of the pandemic, that mental health needs will follow almost the same curve as was followed by the infections by the virus. And we have seen that. We have seen cases of anxiety go up. We have seen cases of depression go up. We have seen instances of drug and alcohol go up. We have seen instances of violence at the domestic level go up. Exactly what we were warned by the World Health Organization seems to be happening. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, where we are this morning is a place that we predicted 5 or 10 years ago, but compounded and complicated by the COVID-19 situation. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, my humble view is that we are doing the right thing this morning at the right time. And as you will see in my third and final proposition, I will be talking to you about more about the workplace and how these two realities have come together to make life as difficult or as interesting as it is. But remember that the beauty of problems is that, in fact, they can be looked at as opportunities. And certainly, when we're done with this morning, you will understand why this COVID-19 presents us with incredible opportunities to move forward properly together. Now, I have talked until my mouth is dry. With the permission of Irene and the other big people, maybe I could take one or two questions at this point while we'll take a breath and while we hear other voices. Irene, is that possible? Even as I put my thoughts together about the second part of the presentation. Irene?
Yes, Daktari.
All right.
Thank you, Daktari. That's very possible. We already have 3 questions in our Q&A section of the Zoom platform. I could read them out as you get your water, and then we can take 2 more so that we can respond to 5 questions. So question number 1 is from Isaac Boit. He says, I've heard Daktari mention mental health and happiness. Are they interlinked? Mental health and happiness, are they interlinked? Boit also has another question. What's the difference between stress and depression? The difference between stress and depression. We have Amina Abdi. She says, Doctor, do you advise that we should have mental health and management policies in our organizations? And another one still from Amina. What are the red flags in terms of behavior of a member of staff undergoing a mental health condition? We are aware this is a silent disease. Those are the 4 questions that we have. If we can get one more from the participants, you could raise your hand and ask a question, and then Daktari can respond to the 4 of them. Yes, we have Helen.
Hello, are you getting me?
Yes, we can hear you now,
yes,
Helen.
Go ahead.
Oh, the question is, mental health is often misdiagnosed, and hence the affected person is not helped appropriately. What measures are taken so that misdiagnosis of mental health does not lead to one getting into further and further damage before they are helped?
Thank you, Helen. Daktari, we have a number.
No, I'm happy to
Do we take a few more?
Why don't we answer these ones and then take
All
a few
right.
more and then I go back
We have.
Yeah, I can go ahead
All right.
and answer this one.
Let's answer the 5, then we will come back.
Yeah, for a few more. I have no problem with this method.
Yes, please proceed. Thank you.
Works perfectly for me. Okay. Mental health and happiness are similar, but not quite the same, in the sense that many people who have mental illnesses express the symptom of being unhappy. But the formal definition of a mentally healthy person, we will give it to you in the course of this presentation. I'm sure Grace is going to be able to show it to you, but it has a number of components. Primarily, it is a state of well-being in which the person who is mentally healthy is able to discharge all their duties and responsibilities, not only to themselves, but also to their community, but critically is able to achieve their full potential. So and happiness is you cannot be you cannot be happy unless you are in full enjoyment of mental health. So they are similar concepts, but one has a formal definition by the World Health Organization, that is mental health, and happiness is not a concept that exists in general medical practice as we understand it. The next question is, what is the difference between stress and depression? And again, depression is a formal medical condition that has its own definitions within the International Classification of Diseases. And people who live and work in stressful environments, like, for example, stressful working environment, stressful marital situations, and so on, can, in certain instances, develop the medically recognized condition called depression. So stress can lead to mental disorders, including depression. Now, there was a question about mental health management policies. The secret reason for this conversation today is actually to encourage all people who practice in the discipline of human resources really must understand the importance of having a mentally healthy workforce. And you cannot monitor the mental health of those people that work with you unless you yourself understand the basics of mental health. And in modern organizations of the future, and some already in the future, you cannot work meaningfully and usefully without human resources policies that include evaluation and management of mental health conditions. And my hope is that as we go along, more and more organizations will inculcate in their policies mental health policies within their employee assistance programs. Next question related to the red flags in the workplace. You'll be happy to hear that I have a slide in the body of the next part of the presentation that addresses precisely that point. Helen wants to know why mental health misdiagnosis is so common. Well, the simple answer to that very complicated question is that ni kutojua. Ni kutojua in the sense that because of the stigma associated with mental disorders, we have put mental health issues way behind the table of conversation. And therefore, there is no way of making that diagnosis correctly. So I think that is those are the answers to the first 5 questions. Maybe you can take 1 or 2 other questions, Irene.
Thank you, Dr. We have about 29 going to 30 questions in the Q&A.
Well, we must
and
tell
we
people
have
what they want to know.
On the chat.
No,
so, and
okay.
since you keep referring to the slides, maybe the slides could
Let's
cover some of
and
these
then
questions. But before we allow you to get, yes. So we take 5, then we allow you to get into the slides. So I will take 2 from the chats, and I will take another 3 from the people raising their hands, and then you respond to those and we proceed to the presentation. Then hopefully we'll still have some time to get to a little more of the questions. And allow me to acknowledge the presence of our national chairman, Mr. Joseph Onyango, who has joined us on this webinar. We will give him an opportunity to say hello. So we have Sylvia Baraza, who is saying, apart from COVID-19 and the impact it has had on mental health, is there a possibility of mental health being hereditary? So that is one. And someone is asking the relationship between schizophrenia and cerebral palsy. And a third one, Daktari, when you mention the mind, do you mean the brain? That's a very good one. Then let me have Daniel Sire ask his question. Daniel, if you can unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not sure whether Daniel can hear us. Abdul Karim.
Yes. Yes, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Proceed and ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much. I'd like to appreciate the Daktari for being in the platform. I think I'd already sent my question, but it wouldn't hurt to repeat it. First, let me acknowledge that it's a pleasure meeting Daktari. We met back in the days when I was a student at Upper Hill. I believe it's a former school. It was some of the career days, so he advised us. Thank you, Daktari. Now, my question based on this mental issue is sometimes, people have this problem, but how does one know, how do you own up that you have this condition? And when does it reach a stage where it should now be contained? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I was a student at one stage back in the early 60s, actually, of what was then the Dalamere School, now called the Upper Hill School. But that is a story that we will discuss another day. Yeah, I entered the school in 64 and then left afterwards.
Thank you.
So let's start with the last question, which is, how does one know that they are afflicted by a mental illness? That's an interesting question, because inside that question is a statement about a lack of knowledge about what mental illness is. Let me try and explain this as easily as I can. If I say to you now, mimi naenda kula chakula, I have not told you whether I'm going to eat ugali, whether I am going to eat nyama, whether I'm going to eat githeri, but all of them, or even samaki, all of them are chakula. When we talk about mental illness, it's a bit like talking about chakula. A person who is eating fish is not the same person who is eating potatoes. They're completely different things. Mental illnesses are many and formally defined, and there are almost 300 different types of mental illnesses. The problem with us is that we are familiar with only one type of illness. It's a bit like being a person who thinks that githeri is chakula and there is no other chakula. The reason we are in that position of thinking that schizophrenia is the only disease is because that is all that we see. So having given that example, different types of mental illnesses will affect and afflict human beings in different ways, to the extent where sometimes you will be aware that you have an illness, and in some condition you will not be aware. And there's a technical term that we use to describe and discuss some of these conditions, where we say that so-and-so has no insight. When you say that so-and-so has a mental illness and he has no insight, what we mean by that is so-and-so has a mental illness and is unaware that that condition is present, or that he's suffering from that condition. But if, for example, you are suffering from a condition of insomnia or lack of sleep, you're the first person to come to me and say to me, Mzee, I cannot sleep. If you are suffering from, say, depression, you are the same person who will come to me. You know what, Mzee? I don't feel happy anymore. I keep crying all the time. I feel very sad. I feel very hopeless. I have some good news, and I think this is a good time to give us all some good news. More and more in this country, particularly among people aged 40 and below, they come to us without being solicited and say, you know what, doc, I actually think I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I think it's PTSD. And I'll tell you why, doc, I think I have PTSD. I think I have PTSD because when we were traveling to school here and the bus rolled, it is from that, and they describe the symptoms that they have seen on YouTube or Google in some other way. Others come to us and say, you know what, doc? And these are large numbers. These are large numbers of people. They say, doc, I actually think I have ADHD. And then they go on to tell you how they have Googled, how they have checked, and they have classical, or they come and they say they have depression or substance use disorders. So to answer your very, very good question, very briefly indeed, there are mental conditions about which the person is aware, and there are some mental conditions about which the person with the condition is not aware. I hope that is a reasonable answer to your question. Now, this question about mind and brain is a fantastic question. I think if I knocked your head and opened it up, which I have no intention of doing, what I will find inside there, I hope, is some fatty material that is a bit soggy, that is called brain, and I can hold it. That brain, I can hold it in my hand. I have no intention of doing that. But the brain is that sort of fatty and gooey substance that weighs about, I think, about 3 kilos. Now, that stuff is the stuff that enables you to be aware of your environment. It is that brain that allows your mind to function. Your mind is that which gives you awareness and consciousness around you. It helps you to think. It helps you to feel. So the brain is physical and you can touch it. I suggest you don't touch it. And the mind is that which gives you the awareness of your environment. Now, the next question is equal. I mean, it's a fascinating question. Is a relationship between cerebral palsy and schizophrenia. I will answer this question very simply and say these are two different entities, and say that schizophrenia is a very clearly defined chronic severe mental disorder with its own symptoms, and cerebral palsy is often a result of some damage to the brain at one or other stage in the life of a human being. That said, we know that injury, perinatal injury, which is meant that injury to the infant during the pregnancy or during delivery or soon after, can predispose to the development of cerebral palsy. But we also know, and this is, I don't know why this question was asked in this way, it's almost a catch question in the sense that some more subtle injuries that occur during delivery or during pregnancy or soon after can actually lead on more people to have schizophrenia than those people who don't have that kind of injury. A fascinating question, which leads me to Sylvia's question. Sylvia wanted to know, other than COVID-19, can mental conditions be hereditary? In fact, you will be surprised that almost all the characteristics that we hold, including, for example, our height, or the skin or color that we have, our IQ for sure, whether we develop diabetes or hypertension or whatever it is, these are all things that we inherit from one or both of our parents. And it's true that we are the product of the inheritance of our parents. And therefore, the propensity, the likelihood that one will develop this or the other mental condition is really hereditary. However, if only life could be that simple, you find identical twins born from the same egg, and one of them will develop this mental illness, the other one may not. That leads us to a conversation that the inherited component is important, but is not 100%, in the sense that you can inherit the potential for developing schizophrenia, but if the environment is different, you may not go on to develop schizophrenia, which, by the way, is also true. Even if you're born with a propensity to develop hypertension, you don't have to develop hypertension. If you make sure that your salt intake is good, you exercise regularly, you pull down your weight, and you check regularly with your doctor, although you, like your twin brother, have a likelihood of getting hypertension, by taking those important measures, you may not end up developing that hypertension. That is true of all the inheritable conditions, including mental disorders. The simple answer, therefore, is all conditions from hypertension to schizophrenia, ADHD, and so on, have a component of inheritance, but what you are able to do in the environment to protect yourself from developing that condition is really terribly important. Right, unless there are burning questions, Irene, I think that's the end of our questions.
There are plenty. Grace and I are working to respond to some of them on the chat, but let's allow you to do the slides. Probably some of those questions will be covered in the slides.
So what I'll do, Irene, in that case, because I mean, I think I'm here to answer questions of people, not to tell them what I think they should know. What I'll do is I will answer. I will do this presentation quickly, and then we can go on to a Q&A, and that will take us to wherever it takes us. So Grace,
yes, that's
can
fine.
we now have the slideshow? Can we have the slideshow now? So now this is what you are all expecting me to present to you. Next slide, please. So what has been the impact of this COVID-19 thing? And I've touched a little bit on COVID-19. And what the truth is that the individual has had a lot of impact from the COVID-19. For example, one of the earliest things that happened in the pandemic is the fact that we all worried, we are all afraid, that particularly those of us who are in the medical profession, that our lives and livelihoods and those of our loved ones would come to an end. And I think anybody who did not have any apprehension that this COVID thing might kill them does not live on this planet. And I think when Boris Johnson and this other president, the American president, got this whole thing when your neighbors became ill, when your friends started dying. I think we all, in different ways, confronted our mortality, and those who were that way inclined wrote their wills, made peace with God, made peace with their neighbors and with their wives and husbands. And I think without knowing it, I think we all, in our different ways, took this thing extremely seriously in a way that we had not done before. Previous things that happened to us at a communal level. When there is post-election violence, we think, oh, those people are down there. When there's a drought, it's those people there. But this COVID thing is real and personal. And I think we all were affected in our own different ways. And I would really welcome, if time permits, to hear how some individuals reacted in the last 18 months or so. At the family level, similarly, I think the disruption of family and family life was almost beyond belief. For example, at the nuclear level, the fact that all of us were cooped up with those that we are supposed to love the most. Initially, it appeared as though we are in a honeymoon situation where you and your loved one are together the whole day. But after a few days, that proximity started causing problems. The children, for some reason, became very noisy, and they would intrude into your privacy when you're trying to work or trying to think. Your wife or husband would become irritating because, for whatever reason, that people become irritated with one another. And this was a completely new way of dealing. And it didn't surprise me that we were already getting increasing cases of domestic violence arising from this proximity. All that long before the financial crisis that came had made itself evident at the family level, and a lot of people had to make physical and financial adjustments at the same time. And again, all this before we were told that children cannot visit their grandmothers and grandfathers because they might kill them with this virus. So family life was disrupted in a way that I had certainly not seen before. The communities were not spared. There are lots of people who survive through their communities, through their churches, through attending weddings, through attending all manner of chamas and so on. We are social animals, for goodness sake, and the way we have evolved as the human race, we are communal animals, and that again has found impact. Perhaps the most dramatically affected situation is the workplace, because this is new. This is something that has not happened before. Some people have reported, interestingly, increased productivity from people working from home. But some people, and a good example are surgeons, the concept of working from home as a surgeon is a little bit complicated. So even as we discuss the challenges, I think we must talk about it in terms of whose workplace we are talking about. And similarly, our country, a number of things have happened. I think one of the biggest ones is the effect on our economy. I think some people are forgetting that there's a time we were on what appeared like a lockdown. We know people couldn't go out and that sort of thing. And I think we are continuing to suffer the consequences. And perhaps without needing to say it, we are in a new global order. And I don't think that this world will be the same again post this pandemic at many levels. The first and perhaps simplest level is the virus has demonstrated to us how dependent and interdependent we are. Because a little virus from wherever it came from has, without respect of one's stature or financial positioning, affected all of us. And it's true now, it's not longer a cliche, that nobody is safe until all of us are safe. So there's one set of conversations there that I think needs to take place even before we talk about the other equally important component, which is equity in health in general. For example, vaccine, we have discovered that kila mtu na yake, the Americans have gone on to vaccinate, to give the booster vaccines to their people. And I think the British are doing the same long before Africa has been able to vaccinate even 5% of her population. Now, conversations around there are, for me, very important conversations about and around equity. And my suspicion is that these are conversations that the Human Resource Institute might want to consider, even as it goes around doing its business. Next slide, please. So there, it doesn't really matter who you are, local or globally. This thing is here with us. What changes have been experienced during this COVID? Well, we've already touched on some of them. Some people can work from home. Some people can choose to work from home. People in the technology field, I think, have been favored by this pandemic very much because they can do a lot. But the second bullet point is what, for me, is very important. There is more attention to mental health of staff. And I think, and I'll say this now and I might repeat it, one of the silver linings around this COVID thing actually is the fact that we have now been able to normalize the conversation around mental health all over, including, as we are doing this morning, at the workplace. Now, I'm looking here, and 505 people are here with us. When is the last time anybody, other than a political rally, was able to address 500 people in one sitting? I said that COVID has created opportunities. And I think those who are able to actually sorry, forgive me for that. Those people who are able to take advantage of the changes that are taking place, including this kind of delivery of care, I think we have an opportunity that we must grasp. So I think depending on how one relates and behaves around this, some people will be worse off, but I think many of us will turn out to be better off. Next slide, please. So what are the key issues that are coming up? And we have touched on some of these ones. We have talked about stress and anxiety, exactly as we had been promised by the World Health Organization. Loneliness, and let me repeat that because it's very important. And I want everybody to read that word to themselves, loneliness. Loneliness is the new big killer of people, particularly the elderly. Now, there's a lot of talk about don't visit your grandmother, don't visit your grandfather, don't go up country. Well, it is true that you might send this virus to them, but let me tell you, in current and new studies, we have established that you are more likely to die if you're my age, if you're lonely, than before was recognized. So even as we we tell old people to stay on their own, remember that loneliness is a big killer. We've talked about depression. We were warned by the World Health Organization, drug use, domestic violence, and low self-esteem. The number of people who get up in the morning with some difficulty, brush their teeth because they're not going anywhere, with even greater difficulties, wash their faces and perhaps even dress up if they are, and stay with their stockings that they slept in the whole day and just look awful during this pandemic is many, and we know them by name, and some of them might even be here now. All that, going up and out to work, the ceremony of getting up and out, much as we complain about traffic all the time, the act of going out to be with other people is actually promotive of our self-esteem and makes us feel good. So going to work is difficult with all but can sometimes, next slide please, can sometimes be something that will give us a little bit of self-esteem. Now, this is a recent study that is really self-explanatory. 76% of those workers who are studied believe that their companies should be doing more to support the mental health of their workforce. Now, this reality, whether it's true in Kenya or not, I don't know, really falls within your institute very squarely. A similar number said that the pandemic has negatively affected their mental health. I think this is a good statement in the sense that people now are confessing and concluding that they not only do they have a mental health need, but they have been affected negatively by this pandemic. And then what are the symptoms that are associated with mental health problems? Poor sleep, poor physical health, reduced happiness at home. We talked about happiness or lack of it, difficulties within the family. In other words, the very things that we have talked about as being negatively affected were confirmed in this study. Next slide, please. So now we wanted to know a little bit about the workplace and the relationship with stress. These are yet other numbers that perhaps I would bring to your attention for whatever they are worth. 80% of workers feel stress on the job. Here, what's going on? Nearly half, thank you. Nearly half say that they need help in learning how to manage stress. 42% say that their co-workers need help. Stress levels in the workplace are rising, and so on. This slide is only meant to show you that not only are there issues at the workplace, but crucially, that the workers are aware that there are issues. And those responsible for the management of human resources, all they need are tools or instruments of eliciting this kind of information. Next slide, please. Now, so what is the impact of stress and poor mental wellness? Well, this is a big one. This is a very important one. I mentioned, perhaps you have forgotten, or you are not present, or you're asleep, I don't know, because I can't see you, that the reason the mind and the body are so important. And the reason I am a psychiatrist, having studied medicine, is because of the link between mental health and physical body. And indeed, if you're in a stressful environment, the likelihood of developing, say, hypertension, ulcers, and other conditions is that much more. Secondly, and of interest to you in the Human Resource Department, more time taken off even when not unwell. If you're not happy at work, if you're stressed, any little excuse will enable you to stay at home and we'll be coming to the symptoms in a following slide. And lower job satisfaction. People go to work, their bodies are at work, and yes, the slide will be shared. Yes, okay, no problem. I've just seen that message there. So, and they're all the time Googling and on YouTube and searching for new jobs, Brighter Monday and so on, because the body is at work and the mind is not. On the employer, and again, we all know this, one of the ways you assess the state of health of your company is by evaluating the rates of absenteeism. Happy companies have low absentee rates, and happy companies have, and that's standard all over the world. Another way you can study this, and there are many tools of doing this, is happy companies have good productivity, stressed companies have low productivity, high turnover rate. I think boards are always asking the HR department to tell us what was our turnover rate of staff in the last reporting period, last quarter, last 1 year, whatever. And one of the ways, one of the tools that you can use telling how stressed or unhappy your company is by the turnover. And finally, and there are many other indices, your medical bills. Doctors over the years have become very rich in general practice, for example, because stressed people go to general practitioners and other doctors in general. Come on, let's face it. And they say, oh, kichwa, oh, mugongo, oh, tumbo, oh, all manner of complaints. And they get all manner of investigations from top to toe. All of it because of undiagnosed stress at the workplace. So your insurance keeps going up. If you have got a scheme that you pay for yourselves, the costs go up. And that, I'm sorry to say to you, I'm happy to say to you, is a sign that your company is not as happy as it might be. Next slide, please. So, what is a workplace wellness story about? There is a formal definition, which you can see there, defined by the Center for Diseases Control, CDC, which defines it, workplace wellness, as a coordinated and comprehensive set of health promotion. So it has to be comprehensive, and it has to be coordinated, and it has to be strategic and implemented at the workplace, and so on. You can see that definition there. And my proposition here is that whatever else we might do, this might be a good starting point for all our employees that are working to us. And this is a conversation that we are prepared to carry on. Next slide, please. So why is workplace wellness important? Well, as you all know, we spend a lot of work at the workplace. And for many people, the workplace is really, we're awake at the workplace for longer than we are at home. And this, in spite of the fact that more and more people, particularly the younger ones, are working very effectively remotely. And remember, this is the last bullet point, that mental illness may be a pre-existing condition. You may be employed while you still have a mental illness. The fact of a mental illness is no reason not to be employed, and it can also be a condition that is diagnosed while you're still employed by your particular employer. Next slide, please. So it is important that human resource practitioners are aware of how to recognize common psychiatric or mental health disorders. Mental health challenges faced by staff. Well, I've talked about this one. Toxic environments are of particular importance, where people feel unheard by their supervisors, where people feel unimportant. These could lead on to anxiety and depression. Next slide, please. We're coming to the end now, so you can take questions. So this question was asked, and I promised that this slide was coming up. How do you recognize poor mental health at the workplace? First of all, the person or those around him must express distress. The person must be able to say, I can't sleep anymore these days, I can't eat, I don't feel happy. Or the boss will say, you are a poor fellow, you're not. Somebody, there must be, in a manner of speaking, a complainant, the first point. The second thing is that this person must be behaving in a way that is different from the way that he normally functions. A young man or woman who normally presents their work on time, who suddenly becomes sloppy and is presenting careless work, that person must be the subject of inquiry by you, the human resource expert. There may be instances, happily not many, where the person is posing danger either to themselves or to others, and there are extremes. There is extreme of posing danger to yourself, for example, young men who drive and drink, you may be aware of that, or in the other extreme, people who hold paranoid delusions who might harm other people. Dysfunction at the workplace, as I say, is an important early indicator, and there are people who practice in ways that are culturally unacceptable at the workplace. Next slide, please, as we come to the end. So what are signs of the symptoms of problems at the workplace? Withdrawal from the team, very, very, very important, very dangerous sign. If a person who was previously jolly and engaging with other staff members, a person who used to volunteer to do things together with other people, suddenly becomes isolated and is indifferent to the work environment, then you, as the person in that department, must wonder where a previously engaged individual is becoming indifferent. A worker who was able to meet their deadlines and then suddenly is unable to meet their deadlines, so their work is becoming sloppy. Before you give them a letter to show cause from today, ask yourself, why is it that this guy who has been with us for the last 6 years is now putting things off? He's missing deadlines. What is it? We've talked about lateness. Lateness to work in somebody who has always been on time could indicate an indifference to outcome or as to what might happen to them. In manufacturing places, for example, industry, for example, the number of accidents at work or even road accidents is a good indicator that the people are not concentrating on what they are doing and that there may be some underlying mental health need. Lack of confidence. A worker is told to do a presentation before a small committee. They start trembling. Low motivation and detachment. And the other thing that perhaps employers don't think about or HR departments don't think about, a guy who previously used to go to work with a tie, hair combed, nice jacket, when they start coming without ties, with a dirty shirt, everything is chaff here, the same jacket for 3 weeks unchanged. And this was a very happy, lucky going young man who used or woman who used to have her hair done whatever it was. Those are all things that change appearance that should lead you in HR to wonder, why is this girl suddenly not interested in her nails or the way that she looks after her hair? Why is this boy so scruffy? These are early and easily detectable signs that all is not well. Next slide, please. And these are additional symptoms that one could see. You come to work with red eyes and you're asked, what is the problem? You say, I couldn't sleep all night. I've not been able to sleep. A feeling that you ask, what is the problem? I say, this job, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but I somehow becoming very vague about what is going on at the workplace. Next slide, please. So if you determine that there is an issue, and this is a department where Grace Gachanja and her team would be of much help, you must, before you issue that letter, show cause, or before you start any disciplinary procedure or proceedings, you must satisfy yourself that the cause of that new and unacceptable behavior is not the result of mental health need. And there are ways to do it. I can't go into them right here now, but other than to say that you need to consider the possibility. And for me, at the end of this presentation today, if one of you is able to ask themselves, is it possible that this employee to whom I am about to address a show cause letter might be suffering from a depressive illness, the way Dr. Jenga was saying, my job for today will have been done with great success. Next slide, please. We're coming to the end now. So we agreed that these slides will be distributed to anybody who might be interested in them. Mental illness in a supervisor, how to address. Those are the issues. First of all, you must look at the behavior and the way that it is affecting the workplace. It's not really how it's affecting his relationship with the shopkeeper who is next door. It's how it is affecting the man or woman at the workplace. The second bullet point, we talked about employee assistance programs must include evaluation of the mental health. It's important where possible and appropriate to get workers to feel supported at the workplace. There are instances where you as the HR director, whatever it is that you are, may have a difficulty talking to an employee. It may be possible, I don't know in your organization how that goes, to have a peer talking to that person. Next slide, please. But critically, and this is important, and I look at you all in the face and say this, you must really know yourself. And you must be able to distinguish what is it about me, Frank Jenga, that might be affecting the way I see this young man or woman. Could actually the log be in my eye and not in that little boy's or that little girl's eyes? And this is important because we are not taught to do that. We are taught to look at them and to see what it is about them that could be wrong. But, and this we know that we are sometimes not quite at fault, but we are affected by the things we do at home with our families, with our own financial problems, with our own problems with our spouses and with our relatives. And we must be careful as we come to the end of this presentation that we are able to distinguish our problems from those of the people under our charge. Next slide, please. This is a system of referral. So the family will express some concern. You may go to a counselor, you'll be assessed. Psychiatrist like myself will see you. You may be admitted or not admitted, whatever happens to you. But most importantly, and this is where your HR department comes into play, follow-up. A lot of people, a lot of effort is lost because there is no follow-up post-discharge from care. So I think that is very, very, very important. Next slide, please. We're coming to the end now. So this one I will not talk about because this is not my work. This is Grace Gachanja's work. And if she's asked, she can talk about it. Next slide, please. So that's where we work from. This is where I am. You see that big building on the left. I'm sitting at the corner. That window that is open actually is where I am. I wish I could wave at you, but will not wave at you. But that's where I'm working from. Ladies and gentlemen, stop this slide now. Grace, stop it. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now take questions. And thank you so much for your very kind invitation. It's been a long morning, but I hope it has been of some use to at least some of you. Thank you so much and have a good morning. I'll take questions now. Irene.
Thank you, Daktari. I'm sure everyone participating is appreciating your input. And thank you for the approach because you have covered most of the questions that have been asked. And indeed, we will share the slides. I can see some of you sharing your email addresses. We are also able to generate the details that you used to register. So we will share with you the slides after this webinar. At this point, allow me, before we take questions, to check whether our national chairman is still with us. And he can say his hello, and then we can take a few questions. This session is meant to end at 12:30, and it's currently 12:10. So we have 20 minutes to go. So thank you for your participation. Keep them coming. And Grace, also, if you can respond to some of the questions on the Q&A, and I believe we can also respond to them and share with the participants. Chairman, if you can hear me. All right, I think he is not able to speak to us. So Daktari, before we take the questions from the participants, I've read through the Q&As and summarized some of the questions that are being repeated. And I will share with you. So the issue around diagnosis and misdiagnosis is coming up in very many questions. Someone is saying you can take X-rays and tests. Is that a sure way of getting the right diagnosis? So that is something you could touch on. Secondly, mental health illness. Is mental health an illness, a condition, and can it be classified as a disability? That came up a lot, what mental health is and what it's not. Thirdly, to elaborate on some of the mental health issues, you have listed them, but I don't think you went into the details of them. So anxiety, stress, schizophrenia, depression, bipolar. I think people want to be clear on what is what and how does each of them manifest, something like that. And then can one be dismissed on grounds of mental illness? Now from a HR perspective, can one be dismissed on grounds of mental illness? We have another one about healing the healer. This I got from Dr. Hongo. I don't know whether he's on the call. Part of the reason why the Institute is partnering with the Chiromo Hospital Group is to really come up with what Daktari has talked about, a toolkit. So how do we support HR professionals, build the capacity to be able to identify some of these symptoms and provide the necessary support? And we will give you the details as we proceed. A lot is in the works and we will be sharing that. So how can HR professionals be supported to support their teams? And finally, how can you encourage people who are in denial to seek help? or who do not see that they need help? How do you support them to seek help? I think that we take those that summarizes majority of the questions, then we will do another round of the questions from the participants. Thank you.
Okay. Again, we'll start with the last question. The last question is, questioner is always lucky. This question of denial to seek help is closely intertwined with two things. The first one is ignorance. And that's why we are here. We are here so that we can educate. And education is not an event, it's a progressive thing. There will be some people here today that we are talking to today who will end up today saying, you know, I didn't know, blah, 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 whatever it is that they say. So it's a mission that we have set for ourselves, all of us, not just Frank Jenga, but all of us in the mental health field, to educate people. So you might appear as though you are in a state of denial, but in fact, what is the problem is the fact that you are without knowledge. So education and knowledge are critical to dealing with some people who appear to be in a state of denial. And I'll come back to that in a minute. The other one is stigma. When we went around as a mental health task force, one of the big things that we established was that there's a lot of stigma and stigmatization around mental health and well-being in the whole country and across communities. That's the bad news. The good news, as I said earlier on, is that this stigma is very interestingly belongs to old people. Let me say it again. If you're a stigmatizer, you are part of the past, and happily we will not be with you very long. Young people do not have any stigma about and around mental health. And these two things, ignorance and stigma, are the key drivers to people refusing or denying or failing to attend to their mental health. I have good news for all of us here today. That thing of ignorance and denial and stigma is rapidly getting less in our country, in part because of all the activities that are being carried out by government, by non-government organizations, by individuals. Those who follow social media will see and will tell you that everybody is doing a lot to deal with this problem. So that for me is good news. The second question, I'm going backwards now, is this question of healing the healer. Some years ago, and again, this is true, it was established beyond doubt that the healer needs healing. And even before we attend to you people in the HR field, we as doctors have, again, within your knowledge, those of you here present, are really at exceedingly high risk. And there are now formal structures within the Medical Practitioners and Dentist Council to ensure the welfare and well-being of doctors. But it's also true that human resource practitioners, because of the nature of the jobs that you do, you will also need Grace Gachanja to help you to understand how best to recognize yourself when you are going into a state of decompensation. Because yours is a difficult job, you're dealing with human beings. I don't know the extent to which your training has included recognition of your own vulnerability to developing this, but that is something that I'm sure Grace Gachanja is able to help you. The next is a question of, perhaps I should have gone into greater detail about anxiety, bipolar and mood disorders, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality. You know what? I can't. And I'll tell you why I can't. Because I don't have 3 years to talk about it. There are 300 or so conditions, each with its own peculiar characteristics. And happily for us, we don't have to know all of them today. It is enough to know that experts can tell the difference between a bipolar mood disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety and depression, because that is what they are paid to do. What is appropriate and necessary from a human resource perspective is for you to be able to say, hapa kuna kitu, there is a problem here. I don't know exactly what it is, so I will have to ask the expert. The next question related to disability and mental health. No. In our country, we are signatories to a number of international conventions. Our constitution is very clear on discrimination, on various the human rights and all those charters. No, you can't be you can't be dismissed from your job because you have a mental condition. Yeah, I think that's the simplest way to say it. But you could lose your job if you're unable to perform that job for whatever reason that there is. In fact, let me say this now, because it's a very, very, very important thing. A lot of companies are breaking the law in terms of the Mental Health Act of 1989, which is still operative, because they discriminate against people who have mental health needs with respect to insurance. Let me say this, we have reported you already to the insurance regulator, and any company that limits in any way the benefits that is enjoyed by their employees with regard to mental disorders are breaking the law, and perhaps will find themselves going to jail if they are found. So this is all to do with equity and access of care for people with mental health needs. So if you're discriminating against people who have depression or anxiety, whatever condition it is, in your medical insurance policies, you are in breach of the law, and the law might come looking for you one day. And the last question, which was the first, was to do with diagnosis or misdiagnosis. My assumption here has to be that the expert that you go to see have been properly trained, examined, and registered to do the job that they're supposed to do. And if for some reason they are unable to diagnose correctly and treat correctly the condition, then they must find their way out of the register that registers them as experts. Mental health diagnosis and treatment is not a matter of chance, is not a matter of guesswork. The diagnoses are made positively by experts who have been trained, and therefore, really, I am not worried that there is any chance of misdiagnosis if, and this is a big if, you restrict yourself to attending to those doctors who are qualified and registered, or psychologists for that matter, to do a particular job. Irene?
Thank you, Daktari. Thank you so much. Now that you have said doctor, you have said psychologist. Remember, I'd seen a question that asked, I think you will mention that, although you clarify at the beginning. If we could, it's currently 12:20. We have 10 minutes to go. Daktari, the participants are really appreciating your presentation and the slides, which we will share. So any 3 burning questions? All right, or we can read the ones in the Q&A. We have Winfred, who says, how does one who is suffering from a mental illness come to be understood at home and family, etc., since they behave differently from a normal person? Evangeline Atinda, how can we assist staff who are not willing to open up? I think Daktari has mentioned about not willing to open up and why that is happening. There is another question here, anonymous. How does one who is suffering from mental illness come? Okay, sorry, I think I've read that one. I think we have covered most of them. Thank you for the introductions, Daktari. I'm also interested in learning the correlation between mental health and poverty. There was another one about mental health and spinal injuries. So what's the relationship of mental health and other illnesses? But this one on poverty is an interesting one. And how does one remain centered when they're trying to focus at work? I think we leave it at that for now. Doctor, you could respond to this.
Okay, not a problem. I'm happy to do that. Let's again start with the last question and work our way to the top. I'm not entirely sure what would cause a person to want to remain centered at work, but I'll speak only as a doctor now. And I've talked about this one in the body of the third part of the presentation, which is that when you find that you are distracted at work, the enthusiasm that used to take you to work is waning, your interest is becoming less and less over a period of time, it may be that you're burning out. And one of the reasons that cause people to burn out is when you are working in what might be considered to be a hostile work environment. So it may be if you are not centered ab initio at a job, it may be that you are poorly matched with that particular job. But if your interest at a job is getting less over a period of time, either the job has changed and is becoming toxic, or you yourself have changed or are changing and are developing, say, a depressive illness. In either event, that feeling that you need to be centered has to be examined first by yourself. Is it the job that has changed? Is it I who have changed? So that you can deal with that question. Mental health and poverty, an incredibly interesting question, if interesting only because of its complexity. We do know that poverty and mental ill health have a kind of correlation, and it's true that in poverty, more mental conditions are to be found. What makes it complicated is the fact that more and more money does not create happiness. So if you try to work yourself out of mental illness by accumulating a lot of money, you are likely to be disappointed. In fact, there are some interesting economists who have tried to do a calculation on the optimum amount of income that where people at their highest. Of course, it will depend on whether you're working in Nairobi or in Kinshasa, wherever it is that you're working, what that actual number becomes. But let it be sufficient for me to say here now that there is a connection between mental health and rather poor mental health and a state of poverty. But again, and I want to try and get this one into context, whereas absolute poverty makes most people more likely to go into states of depression, poverty exists not only by itself. Poverty exists with other things. For example, if you live in a poor neighborhood, the likelihood that you will not have running water, electricity, security is poor, you will be hungry, there'll be more violence in the neighborhood. All those things independently and together make it more likely that you will be more stressed than other people. And in fact, there are experts who argue that the link is not between poverty and mental disorders. It's more the stress that is associated with being poor in a poor neighborhood, no water, no electricity, high crime. And it gets even worse because when you're in a deprived neighborhood, you're more likely to be an immigrant or to be a marginalized individual in a particular community. The stressors that come around all that have a link to poor mental health. If you thought I had finished, I haven't. Because there's yet another concept that is applicable here, and that's a concept of relative poverty. For example, if you live in a place where everybody does not have running water, it's kind of, you are all equally poor. If you are the only one in that environment who cannot afford mafuta ya taa, so that you can either cook or get your children to use a light to read, then that relative poverty comes into play in making you even more prone to a state of poverty. And so on. If you have no mafuta ya kupika chakula and your neighbors have mafuta and can buy, I think it's called whatever it is, kadogo, then again, and the final concept, and there are many concepts, shouldn't have asked this question, is a question of recently becoming poor. If you have previously been able to borrow and pay your debts from your neighbors, and suddenly, whatever misfortune it is that have visited you, your wife or husband has passed on, or her business or his business has collapsed, that change in fortune from being able to cope, even at what appears to be a relatively low level, that drop is also an important cause that leads to mental health needs. Evelyn wanted to know, how do you assist staff at the workplace? I think I mentioned this. The first thing is for you as an HR expert to have your antennae up all the time. These discipline issues that are being brought to you, these low productivity issues that are being brought to you, this absenteeism, these lateness issues, all of them, all I expect you to do at this stage, Evelyn, is to consider the possibility that this could be a mental health issue. Is it always a mental health issue? Of course not. Is it sometimes a mental health issue? Yes, it is. All I want you to do is to consider it as a possibility. And once you've done that, then I trust that depending on what it is, you will know what to do. For example, if it's somebody who has come to you aggressively and making a lot of noise, then it's not difficult to call whoever your medical provider is and say, we have Mr. Thomas here who is in the whatever department, and we think he's behaving abnormally. I have sent him to you for evaluation. If it's a case of poor productivity and this guy crying all the time, you as an HR expert are able to talk to them and ask them, excuse me, please, why are you sad? Why are you crying like this? And then you can call Grace Gachanja and other people who do that work. And finally, at home, how does a family member get understood at home? Is the same answer that I have given to Evelyn, which is that really it depends on what condition it is. Some are just obvious and anybody can tell, and you don't have to be an expert. Others are people who will talk. The important thing at home and at work is to have what we as doctors are taught as medical students, which is to have what is called a high index of suspicion, and to allow yourself to consider always the possibility that this may or may not be. And for me, at this point, as long as you ask yourself that question, my job is done and it's done well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daktari. We truly appreciate your time. And like an English fellow, I think you're staying in London, influence. It's exactly 12:30, and we would want to keep time so that we can allow people to get to their day. As indicated earlier, and I will ask my colleague Dan to share the flyer. We will share the slides with you. We have your details. So we'll be able to do that. We will also share the recording. So we are recording, it's available and live on YouTube and also on our Facebook platform at the moment. And on your screen, we have an invitation to the 25th Annual National HRM Conference. This is from the 26th to the 29th of October. We'll be in Mombasa. So please, if you have the opportunity to join us, some of the speakers, I don't know whether Dan, you're ready with that flyer, including Dr. Jenga. He will be there for the opening ceremony. And we are going big on mental health issues. Like I said, the partnership between IHRM and Chiromo Hospital Group will go beyond this webinar. It is going to be long-term, and we are committed to supporting HR professionals, mainstream mental health, well-being, and wellness at the places of work. So we have to lead the conversation. So there we have it. We have Dr. Frank Jenga, who is the Presidential Advisor on Mental Health, who will be our keynote speaker. We have Ms. Rina Hicks, who is a financial expert. We have the Reverend Dr. David Oginde, who will be speaking around ethics and values as we look at transitioning and anchoring resilience. So how do we remain resilient as individuals and also run organizations that can withstand the test of times, because that is what we are faced with. Thank you, Dan, for sharing that. Thank you, Daktari, for your presentation. And thank you, Grace and Beryl, for staying on. And for the participants, I think the highest number we hit was 500, apart from the panelists. And we truly appreciate that you took time to join this webinar, and we hope that it is useful. And like Daktari is saying, if it triggers you to think differently, to consider things differently, it is a good start for us. So from IHRM and from the Chiromo Hospital Group, we wish you a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to your participation on the other activities that we will have on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.